The desert night was thick with silence, broken only by the low hum of engines and the faint rustle of sand against metal. A small SEAL team crouched in the shadows, their eyes fixed on the horizon where danger could emerge at any second. Orders had been given, but hesitation lingered in the air. Some of the men shifted nervously, their breaths heavy with doubt. They trusted their commander. But tonight's orders had come from someone new. An unfamiliar voice carried authority, but not yet their loyalty. The weight of uncertainty pressed down harder than the heat of the day had. She stood at the center of it all, calm but unyielding. The young officer's presence clashed with the battlefield's raw tension. Her plan was bold, even reckless to some, but her voice had been steady when she laid it out. Now, with the mission seconds from unfolding, the team's silence was more than waiting, it was questioning. A murmur rippled through the group, low and uneasy. One of the operators finally spoke what the others were thinking. Are we really going to follow this? Eyes shifted toward the commander, a seasoned SEAL whose word was the final call. The men trusted him with their lives, and his silence stretched longer than the night itself. Every second felt like a test, the desert itself holding its breath for his answer. Then, with a measured calm, he broke the silence. His words cut through doubt like a blade through smoke. We follow the Warthog. The name hit the team with a weight they hadn't expected. The Warthog wasn't just a calcine, it was a reputation. Stories had been whispered, some too wild to believe, others too sharp to ignore. Suddenly, the officer before them wasn't just a stranger giving orders. She carried a name that had already carved its mark into battlefields far from here. The tension shifted, but the doubts didn't vanish. Trust, after all, wasn't built on names. It was proven in action. Engines roared to life, dust curling into the air. The mission was no longer a plan, but a living moment pulling them forward. Questions still burned in their minds, yet the commander's choice had sealed their path. As they rolled into the darkness, one thought echoed louder than the sound of steel and sand: what exactly made the Warthog worth following? The answer waited in the night, hidden in shadows where survival was never promised. And before dawn, they would find out. The convoy moved deeper into the barren stretch of desert, each vehicle crawling like shadows across the sand. Inside, the men sat in silence, their gear rattling softly with every bump. Doubt lingered in their expressions, but none dared question the commander again. Instead, they stole quick glances at the woman who had just been revealed as the Warthog. Her gaze was fixed forward, calm yet sharp, as if she was reading the terrain long before anyone else could see it. She hadn't earned that calcine by accident. Among certain circles, the name carried weight. It was tied to missions whispered about in hushed tones, missions that ended with impossible survival. Escapes that defied logic and strategies that turned chaos into victory. Some of the team had heard fragments of those stories, though none had ever imagined meeting her face to face. Still, a name wasn't enough to wash away the unease. They wondered if tonight's mission would prove the legend true, or tear it apart in front of them. The commander's trust in her hung heavy in the air. He had fought through too many wars to gamble without reason, yet he had given his men no explanation. That silence spoke louder than words. If he believed in her, there had to be more to her story, something they weren't being told. As the vehicles slowed near a ridge, the team prepared to move on foot. Every man checked his weapon twice, their nerves sharpened by the unknown. The night seemed to still, as if the desert itself was hiding something. And as they formed up behind her, waiting for her signal, the same question pressed against every heartbeat. Was the Warthog leading them into survival or straight into a trap? The desert air pressed heavy against their skin as the team fell into formation, boots sinking slightly into the loose sand. Each man carried the weight of silence, their thoughts louder than the night itself. The Warthog moved ahead with a steady pace, scanning the horizon like someone who had walked this ground before. There was no hesitation in her steps, no pause in her focus. And that alone stirred a mix of curiosity and unease among the men who followed. Stories about her had always sounded more like rumors than facts. Some said she had guided units out of ambushes where no one else would have survived. Others claimed she had spotted traps long before they were sprung, saving lives when even the most advanced intel had failed. The nickname Warthog was said to come from her style in the field and yielding, unpredictable and fiercely protective of the team under her command. But legends were one thing. Tonight was different. Tonight they would see if the myth lived up to the name. The SEAL commander kept close to her side, his expression unreadable. His men wanted answers, but none would question him again. If he had chosen to trust her, then something in her history had earned that trust. Still, the lack of explanation left a crack of doubt that no one could ignore. The team reached the edge of the ridge, crouching low as they studied the valley below. It looked calm, and that only made the silence feel sharper. The Warthog raised a hand, signaling them to hold. For a moment, no one breathed. Then she turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing on something only she seemed to notice. And just like that, the men realized this night was far from ordinary. The valley stretched wide under the pale glow of the moon, shadows pooling in every dip and hollow. From a distance, it looked empty, but the Warthog's steady gaze said otherwise. She crouched low, one hand resting against the ground, as if she could feel something the others couldn't. The men exchanged wary glances. They had walked into dozens of danger zones before. But there was something unsettling about the way she moved, measured, deliberate. Like she was tracing the outline of a threat no one else could see. The SEAL commander leaned close, his voice barely more than a whisper. "What do you see?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on the far side of the valley, where the sand seemed undisturbed, yet somehow wrong. Finally, she spoke, her tone calm but edged with certainty. "They're waiting for us." The words tightened every chest in the team. Fingers clenched harder around rifles, breaths shortened, and the silence grew unbearable. Nothing stirred in the valley. No movement betrayed the presence of an enemy, but her certainty carried weight. If she was right, they were staring at an ambush large enough to crush them before they even crossed. One of the younger operators muttered, "Almost too low to hear. This is suicide." Another shot him a sharp look. But the thought was already hanging heavy over all of them. The Warthog didn't flinch. She reached into the sand, drawing quick lines with her finger, mapping a path through the valley. The plan was daring, dangerous even. Yet it carried a strange precision, as if she had already walked it in her mind 100 times. The commander's eyes studied the marks in silence, then slowly lifted to meet hers. The team waited, every second stretching thinner than glass, knowing the next word would decide whether they lived or died. The tension snapped into stillness as he opened his mouth, ready to give the order. The commander's lips parted, the word forming on his tongue, when a sharp crack split the silence. A single round struck the ridge just feet from their position, sending fragments of rock into the air. The team froze. It wasn't a random shot. It was a warning. Someone out there already had them in their sights. The Warthog's hand shot up, signaling the men to stay down. Her eyes scanned the darkness below, but her focus wasn't on the valley anymore. She turned her gaze behind them, toward the ridge they had just crossed. A chill ran through the group as the realization sank in. The ambush wasn't waiting ahead, was closing in from both sides. Whispers rippled through the squad, raw tension cutting into every voice. "They knew we were coming. We're boxed in." The weight of betrayal hung in the air, heavier than the desert heat. Someone had leaked their movements. The Warthog's jaw tightened, her expression still unreadable, but her silence spoke volumes. She had seen this before, an enemy who didn't just wait, but studied every step, anticipating their choices before they made them. The men looked to the commander, desperate for direction, but his eyes were locked on her. Then, in a low voice, she said, "They want us to choose the valley." But that's not the trap. Her words cut through the fear like a knife. If the valley wasn't the real danger, then what was? And how far had their enemies gone to lure them here? Every man felt the noose tightening, the mission spiraling into something far more dangerous than expected. The sand shifted under their boots, the air charged with the weight of unseen eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, the enemy was waiting for their move, because whatever choice they made next would decide everything. The team crouched low, every muscle wound tight as the commander finally gave a nod. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it carried the weight of finality. The Warthog moved first, leading them away from the valley and into the jagged rocks lining the ridge. It wasn't the safe path, but it was the only one that broke the enemy's expectation. The men followed, nerves frayed, every steep going louder than the last in their minds. Then the night erupted. Gunfire rained down from both sides, tracer rounds slicing through the dark. The ridge came alive with flashes of light as the enemy revealed their hand, thinking they had the team boxed in. But the Warthog had already mapped their moves. She signaled sharply, guiding the SEALs into narrow cuts in the rock, where the enemy fire couldn't reach as easily. From there, they struck back swift, precise, controlled. What had started as an ambush began to unravel. The enemy had counted on panic, but instead met discipline. The commander's calm voice cut through the chaos, and the men rallied, their trust shifting with every passing second. They realized the Warthog wasn't guessing, she was predicting. Every time the enemy shifted, she was already there, steering the team a step ahead. Minutes felt like hours, but the tide turned. The valley that had looked so harmless now burned with the chaos of the ambushers' failure. When the last shots faded, the desert returned to silence, broken only by the men's ragged breaths. They had survived what should have been impossible, but just as relief began to sink in, the Warthog crouched over one of the enemy radios left behind. Static crackled, then a voice cut through calm, deliberate, chilling. "You did well tonight, but you were never the target." The team froze. The desert was silent again. But the message was clear. The real game had only just begun. The words from the radio lingered in the air long after the static faded, leaving the team unsettled. They had fought through the night, survived an ambush, and outmaneuvered an enemy who thought they knew every move, but now it was clear the mission was part of something larger. The SEALs exchanged glances, searching for answers in each other's eyes, but found only the same unspoken question. If they weren't the target, then who was? The commander's face was unreadable, but his calm steadiness anchored the men. He turned to the Warthog, waiting for her read. She studied the valley one last time, her sharp gaze lingering on the tracks in the sand, the discarded weapons, the carefully laid positions. Finally, she exhaled slowly. This wasn't about destroying us. It was about seeing how far we'd go. Her words landed heavy, but they also explained what no one wanted to admit: the enemy wasn't just fighting a battle, they were testing the team. The SEALs had been measured, pushed, and forced into a corner, only to fight their way out. The realization brought a quiet sense of respect, not only for their own resilience, but for the one who had led them through it. As the sun began to rise, painting the desert in gold, the team prepared to move out. Exhaustion pulled at their bodies, but a different energy stirred in their hearts. They had faced doubt, fear, and betrayal, yet they had come out stronger. The Warthog's name was no longer a rumor whispered in shadows. It was a reality they had lived through. Before they left the ridge, the commander glanced at his men and spoke simply. remember tonight." This was only the beginning, and with that, they walked into the dawn, carrying the weight of what they had survived, then the certainty that greater battles still waited ahead.